Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This is lecture number 3 on the series of the origin of the dinosaurs. What we're getting into in this series, or this part of the series, is how could the dinosaurs fit into non-Western biblical parameters of thinking? This question is intentional, and just meaning that we are leaving the non-Western biblical parameters intact as they were understood or as they were written, and trying to understand them from the non-Western perspective. That doesn't mean that I understand them entirely, but I do understand that there's a difference between my interpreting of them and maybe the original understanding of them, because I have more of a Western formation thinking, but I'm trying to understand it from a non-Western point of view, which then what that would mean is that they live in an open system and there's a lot of things that are possible. And with an open system, you have powers, you have spirits, you have things that in a Western system doesn't make sense, doesn't make logic, doesn't make reason, and nor has it been empirically proved. And so those are sources or methods that are Western, and whereas we're trying to look at this from a non-Western perspective. So how could the dinosaurs fit into, so we're trying to take the concept and the existence of dinosaurs and fit them. So we're molding the knowledge or the understanding about dinosaurs, and how does it fit into the biblical parameter, not trying to fit the biblical parameter to fit the existence of dinosaurs. It's the other way around. One is that to understand is that the biblical parameter has been written over a span of several thousand years. And the term dinosaur has existed since 1849. So are there dinosaurs in the Bible? And the answer would be no, because dinosaurs and that term did not exist till 1849. But the question then would be, is there then any creation or anything that was created that would be similar to a dinosaur in some way? Now what we're going to read is a few texts that describe an animal that is pretty unknown today. But there have been Westerners that have interpreted the text to fit the Western perspective from today. And so they have said those were hippopotamuses or those were crocodiles. But if you really look at the description of what is being said, that does not fit. Those suggestions of those type of animals don't really fit the original writings. So what they are is a Western attempt from a Western perspective to identify what those animals could be, possibly within a Western perspective. So what we're going to do is we're leaving that Western perspective and we're asking what could those animals be from a non-Western perspective. So that's what we're getting into in this section, is the biblical perspective. To get the biblical perspective, we start with the Bible. And so Romans chapter 1, 18 through 20. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Through Stephen Jay Gould's concept of the 4 factors, he says those 4 factors influence what we choose to observe and then how we perceive it. And so what this text is saying is that men have chosen to suppress the truth. they see this and they turn away and they say, no, I am focusing on this and I'm going to prove this. So in other words, the biblical record says man intentionally suppresses. Man intentionally chooses what he is going to study, what he believes is true, and what exists. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen. If there was a creation, dinosaurs were a part, or dinosaur type animals would have been a part of that creation. Would those animals have reflected the eternal glory, the nature, the divine nature of its creator? I think so. I think that they would have been an awesome sight because the dinosaurs that have been found, and now again, there's a lot of creativity that goes into describing what has been found. There are huge dinosaurs that have been unearthed that they say weighed between 77 to 90 something tons of just a dinosaur. Now, what did they base that on? Well, on some of those are Argentinosaurus from Argentina. I think it was based on 13 bones that was unearthed, and they came up with that it was like a 77-ton animal. And it's kind of like, well, how do you get that? Well, what they do is they measure the humerus and the femur, and then because those would be the weight supporting bones, and they calculate by its thickness of how much weight it might have been able to support. So that's how they gauge the bigness and the heaviness. Now the Argentinosaurus, I believe, is one of the few that has both a humerus and a femur bone that was found together. Most dinosaur skeletons are very incomplete. They're very thrashed, like as if they were buried in a monstrous storm and pulled apart, and so there's not very many complete skeletons of dinosaurs. Most of them are mixed, and I believe the case in this one, at least there was one from Argentina, that the femur was found in one place, and the humerus that they are using connecting to is found a distance of 10 to 15 kilometers away. So it's kind of like, are you sure that those two belong to the same animal? So they are dealing with fragmentary evidence, but just to say the animals were huge. They were up to 40 some feet tall. Their necks, long necks, their tails, their tonnage, they were just massive animals. If they were created, and if we allow that possibility, those animals would have been, for since the creation of the dinosaurs, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. That would have been an example. That would have been an example to use. So, we're going to get into an example, a biblical example that is used, and it's close. We'll see what it says. We're in the book of Job. Job is about a conversation. One, it started out, Job was a rich man, and Job had very much success. And it says Satan went up to God, and God says, "Have you seen my servant Job? He's right on. He's a righteous man." And Satan says, "You take away his riches, and he'll blaspheme you to your face." And so then God says, "Okay, go." So Satan then took away all his riches. In one day, he lost everything, including his children. And so he lost all of his riches, but Job still not blasphemed God. Well, then Satan came back, and God said, "Have you seen my servant?" And he says, "Yeah, but skin for skin. You touch his body, he will give anything for his own health." Okay, touch his body. So, but save his life. So Satan struck him with boils and with different things that just made life miserable. And what did Job do now? Well, then Job received a number of friends that came to console him, and they accused him of sin and saying, "Job, you're a sinner. Repent, because this is the finger of God." It was not the finger of God. God allowed it to happen, yes, but it was to prove that Job did not worship him because of the material blessings and material things he had, but it was because of a spiritual foundation that Job worshiped the Creator God of the world. And so then these friends condemned Job, said, God wouldn't do this unless you were a sinner. And Job then, he went too far and he defended himself. And he says, I have not sinned. In fact, I would like to have an audience with the Creator God, and that he show me my wrong, my condemnation. Well, Job was not a sinner as his friends had accused him of. But then Job stepped over the line a little bit and he lost reverence for the Creator God of the universe. So what do we have? This is now the context. So we're going into Job, chapter 38, verses 1 through 4. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Okay, Job went too far, and he crossed the line. So now God answers finally. And he rebukes Job. Where were you? How are you straightening things out through your human reason? You're just offering dark counsel without understanding. Where were you when I formed the earth? Well, now he goes on to another topic. God does. Job chapter 40, verses 15 through 24. Job, where were you? Behold, Behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, now his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants he lies down, in the covert of the reeds in the marsh. The lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he is not alarmed. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. Can anyone capture him when he is on watch? With barbs, can anyone pierce his nose? Okay. God is getting into a dialogue with Job and saying, where were you when I created Behemoth? Again, if God had created the dinosaur, I think he would have used the dinosaur as an example. Where were you, Job, when I created this thing, Tyrannosaurus Rex? Where were you? He's got tubes of iron. He's got brass. He's just massive. And he could walk through the Jordan River without being moved. We had to cross a few rivers. We had a little four-wheel drive. And sometimes the river came up a little bit because of the rains, and we went across like a cork, bouncing across. I mean, we were floating. And just we had to aim for upstream so that we would eventually make it to where we wanted to get off. And it wasn't that deep of a river. It was probably 4 feet deep or so, and we're bouncing. And so anyway, but it says that animal was so massive that it could just go through the Jordan, cross the Jordan at flood stage, and the water up to its mouth and not be moved. That's massive. And God is saying, Job, where were you when I made him? He's massive. But that's not the strangest or the most majestic thing that God could have pointed to. But that does, if dinosaurs were created, which I believe that they were because they're part of creation and an open system, God is pointing at an animal, Behemoth. And why didn't he say dinosaur? That word didn't exist yet. It didn't exist till 1849. But there's another animal that God is now indicating. And this one is even a little more awesome. And what do we do with it? Well, it all depends on your standpoint. But Job 41, verses 1 through 34. So it's about the whole chapter. So I'm going to be reading through it. So hang with me. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Or will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you bind him for your maidens? Will the traders bargain over him? Will they divide him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Strange animal. Not sure, but it's a marine. He's talking about fish hooks. He's talking about water. The other one was on lotus plants. It was on ground. This one is now a marine animal. And it's somehow some sort of animal that spears, harpoons, and battle don't faze it. And that you don't hunt it to take it to the market and parcel it up and sell out its pieces. You won't get there. It says here, remember the battle. You will not do it again. Why? Well, here. Behold, your expectation is false. You will be laid low even at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Who then is he that can stand before me? Because I created him. How can you stand before me, Job? How can you accuse me? How can you call me into court to defend what is happening to you and blame it on me? That's what he's saying. Look at these animals I created. You're fearful to even stand in front of them. Well, I created them. And you don't have fear of me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs or his mighty strength or his orderly frame. So God's going to go on now. And he's going to talk about Leviathan, what he has created. Who can strip off his outer armor? Who can come within his double mail? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth there is terror. His strong scales are his pride and shut up as with a tight seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. Wow, this is an armored tank. This is an awesome animal that God is describing being his maker of. Now, we get into some interesting commentary of what God is relating about this animal to Job and his friends. His sneezes flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils smoke goes forth as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes forth from his mouth. Now what do we have? Well, if we're Westerner, we'd say that is very poetic. Why? Because as a Westerner, that is not possible. But as a non-Westerner, an open system, is that possible? And the answer would be yes, that is possible. Even in the animal world today, or the insect world, it's been shown the bombardier beetle can shoot out its back flame. It combines, has two chambers that combines in a cannon out the back, and it usually fires it at some frog that's trying to come up behind it. So in the animal world today, there are animals that can produce fire. So it is possible today in the animal world. But what we're talking about is an animal that is a dragon now, basically. Did dragons exist? And we would say, no, they're mythological. We would say that from our Western perspective because of how we've been trained to categorize and to think and the parameters to think by. But is it possible that the dragons that we have thought of as mythological characters were not? This little guy is reflecting. God is using him as an example of his eternal power and divine nature. That's quite an awesome object lesson. Going on. In his neck lodges strength, and dismay leaps before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together, firm on him and immovable. His heart is as hard as a stone, even as hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty fear. Because of the crashing, they are bewildered. Okay, it's a marine animal. And it's a marine animal that you don't go fishing for to bring it back to the market, to sell at the fish market. You won't live to tell about it. The sword that reaches him cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He regards iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned into stubble for him. Clubs are regarded as a stubble. He laughs at the rattling of the javelin. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads out like a threshing sledge on the mire. Okay, so he can come up out of the water. He makes the depths boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. Behind him, he makes a wake to shine. One would think the deep to be gray-haired. Nothing on earth is like him, one made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. Interesting signing off on this animal that God uses as an example of his greatness, of his holiness, of his omnipotence. And who is Job to call him into court or to question his goodness or question? Job, you have lost your fear of me, your reverence for me, but yet I know you reverence this animal, and I made him. Do you fear him? Then what? You should fear me, because I am his maker, and I too am powerful and holy and just. The biblical record. Does it include dinosaurs? No, it does not. Why? Because the term dinosaur came into being in 1849, and the biblical record has been around for thousands of years. So no, it is not in the Bible. Are there animals that could be similar to a dinosaur mentioned in the Bible that God himself uses as an example of his glory, of his majesty, of his power? And I would say yes, that God uses two animals, the Behemoth, which is a land animal, and Leviathan, that is a marine animal. There are two animals that we might call terrible lizards, which would be a dinosaur, because that's what dinosaur is. If we leave the time element to kairos and don't think of chronos, then it is totally possible, and it is. It sounds like it is a dinosaur. But many of us have that prejudice that it cannot be a dinosaur because of the chronology, that they did not exist. And so therefore there are theologians from a Western perspective that say those animals are hippopotamuses, those are alligators, crocodiles, those are, and it's kind of like, no, they aren't. They do not command the fear of man as these animals do. Those other animals I have seen in the marketplaces. They're there. There's fishermen that bring them in and they go back out. This one, it says, you won't go back out. You would never attempt it again to battle with Leviathan. So anyway, that is the biblical parameter, but not the end of the biblical parameter. We are going to get into the next part of the series, a very interesting twist on this biblical parameter of dinosaurs or great animals that God has created that are included in the biblical parameter. Thanks again for joining us. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist, and those are the addresses if you'd like to communicate with us. Thanks again.